You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.
What's going on, Los Angeles? Welcome to the LA Football Show right here on the LA Football Network. We are live on the mightier 1090 ESPN Radio. I'm your co-host, Ryan Dyer, joined as always by the madman, my good friend Jamal Madney. This is your RamsHouse edition. Got a lot of Rams news. When is there not Rams news in the offseason? It's like one of the teams, I don't know if it's the gift that keeps on giving. It's the gift that keeps us busy, whatever you want to call it. But there's always something to talk about the Rams, but I guess makes it so it's not boring. So we're going to get into all of that. But Jamal, what's up, my man? How you doing? You staying dry down there in Westwood?
Staying dry, Ryan. You know, it was looking a little uncertain, let's put it that way, over the course of this week. But every time it felt like it was really raining heavy, the heavy rain only lasted a few minutes and then the sunshine came back out. So LA is doing its best Seattle and London impersonation, I feel like, the last couple of days, with the rain and then the sun and then the rain again. But staying dry, and always excited to do this with you, Ryan, and talk about all of our LA teams. But to begin with, the Rams is very special. They seem to have really embraced the LA mantra of soap opera team. You know, if you're not going to be good on the field, you have to at least be entertaining off the field. In an ideal world, you're both. That's how you become beloved in LA. But you got to be at least one. And frankly, with LA, if you're going to be one, I think you'd rather be more interesting and entertaining off the field than just good on the field and be boring. That's just the ethos of LA. And I think the Rams in 22 and getting into this 23 offseason are seeming to fall into that bucket.
Yeah, you know, since they've been here, they've kind of been both. Except for the very first year, they've been able to be both, and then now they're shifting, and we'll see if they can get back on track. But
yes.
Yeah, crazy. Well, I'm literally, as we're recording, it's pouring rain outside, and yet it's sunny. I just see the sun beaming through, but it's dumping buckets outside. I was driving to my office earlier today after dropping me off, and hailing. Did you get hail down there at all? We had like paintball-sized hail coming down.
Yeah. We got a little bit. It's crazy. Global warming is real, and I mean, my goodness, it's also so cold in LA the last couple of days. I mean, we're getting into the 50s here, high 40s even one day. It's this is not what we signed up for. So we need to get back to the basics.
Well, this morning in Pasadena, it was when I dropped me off around 9, it was 37. I mean,
oh my God.
30s in LA is crazy. Nuts. And we got blizzard warnings, and my cousins are in Wrightwood and everyone. So anyway, everyone be safe out there. I kind of enjoy it every now and then when we get these little crazy rainstorms. There's something beautiful about a rainy LA, mainly because it only lasts usually a day or two. And then it gets back to sunshine. So I know it's supposed to rain all weekend, but everyone stay safe, try to stay dry, stay warm, use this time to, hang out inside, listen to us, watch all 18 of our shows we do every week, and hopefully that'll keep you company. So show is always brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. Head to betonline.ag today. Use our promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV. Gets you a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. You can bet on all sports. You got NBA and NHL going on full swing right now. Golf is very fun to bet on. NASCAR is a growing betting sport. Or obviously you can do NFL futures. So betonline.ag, promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV. Tell them the guys at the LA Football Network sent you. So we teased it. Big news in Ramland, as we'll start the show talking about Bobby Wagner. Just signed last offseason, was kind of and this is no disrespect to Bobby, but the consolation prize after Von Miller was not retained and he jumped for Buffalo. And after just one season, both sides mutually agree to part ways. It seemed very, I don't know, I guess beneficial both sides, but very, very mutual. I mean, it didn't seem like from any reports, any bad blood or anything like that. It was just a business decision that benefited, I think, both sides. So we'll get into it, give our thoughts on it. But what was your initial thought, Jamal, when you saw the news? You texted me right away, like, looks like we got something to talk about today.
Yeah. Yeah, Ryan. Initially, I was surprised. I was a bit stunned, and that lasted for about 15 or 20 seconds, because anytime you get breaking news about one of your teams, you're sort of like, oh my God, what is happening? There's this sort of visceral reaction. You get a pierced pain to the heart. And then after about 20 seconds, when you sort of collect yourself and you think about it, you're like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense on both sides. And I completely agree with you, Ryan. I think it was a very amicable split between the two parties. And I think it's cognizant of how the Rams feel about Bobby Wagner and how much respect they have for him. And you and I kind of talked about this offline, but rather than send him to a place where, as you said, a cap-friendly team that maybe not be the ideal football situation for Bobby Wagner, this allows now Wagner to be a free agent and go to a team of his choice after all of the great accomplishments he's had in his career, while also acknowledging that he just wasn't the right fit for this defensive system. Most notably, he is not a pass rusher in the way Von Miller is. That's the compliment you needed for Aaron Donald. He's obviously more of a run-stopping linebacker, a guy who's going to plug holes, a guy who's going to really survey that middle of the field. And that's just something personnel-wise, schematically, strategically, the Rams never really needed in the same way. And now this gives the Rams the opportunity to move forward in what they need. And it gives Bobby Wagner an opportunity to start chapter 3 of his career in a situation that's best for him.
Yeah, to go back on just the signing of him, and first of all, still had a great season statistically, 140 tackles, 2 interceptions, 6 sacks was the most in his career. So they used him a little differently than what he had used throughout his career. And he still played at a very high level. But from the onset, and you said it was never a fit. It almost felt like a panic signing. Like they lost Von Miller. They weren't really able to add anyone on defense, and I'm not saying this is exactly what they think, but it's almost like Les Snead and company need to make a splash, right? Like, when was the last offseason where they didn't make a splash or in season or anything? I mean, every single year since McVay's been at the helm, they've made a splash some way or the other. You go and get Marcus Peters and Aqib Talib. Then you go and get Jalen Ramsey. Then you get Robert Woods. Then you get Brandon Cooks. There's always this splashy, sexy Hollywood move that they go get. And whether it works or not, they live with that, but then they go and make another splash move. So getting Von Miller, splash move. And then they missed out on him because of that third guaranteed year, which they were only willing to do 2 guaranteed. And it's almost like we got to do something splashy. And here's Bobby Wagner, who's terrorized us for 9 years up in Seattle, or 9+ years up in Seattle. Why don't we just go sign him? And we know he's a great player, and we'll make it work. We'll figure it out. But in reality, and I'm not saying he's as good as Bobby Wagner, but Ernest Jones is the same player. I mean, with this defense, you don't need 2 run-stopping traditional linebackers. You need 1 quote-unquote traditional linebacker and then 1 off-ball or coverage linebacker. As great as Bobby Wagner is, he's not a coverage linebacker. Ernest Jones is not a coverage linebacker. So you had many times last year where the 2 of them couldn't even be on the field together, and they're your 2 guys, and Ernest Jones is a guy that they believe in, and they should believe in because he's progressed really well. So it was never truly a schematic fit, even though statistically he played very well, even though he was the captain of the defense. He wore the green dot. So, did a lot of things very, very good. So I'm not sitting here saying Bobby Wagner himself was a bust or was a bad player for this defense, but just for the price, the money, and where this team is schematically and strategically, it didn't make a lot of sense. Now, I will say the biggest benefit, Jamal, of this was that Ernest Jones had 1 year of tutelage from the great Bobby Wagner. So if we can take any real positives from this move, it was that Ernest Jones, who they've already been bullish on, I'm bullish on, now got a year of tutelage from one of the best in the business to now be the Bobby Wagner of this defense. And the Rams can allocate, I know they're not getting a ton of money, they're not saving a ton from that, but they can allocate other funds or other transitional money to other positions that needs that fit better within the scheme. So unfortunate the way it didn't work out in terms of scheme, but this was the move I think that needed to happen. I personally didn't see it coming, but it makes a whole lot of sense after it was said and done.
Yeah, Ryan, absolutely. And I think there's a couple things that you said that were particularly interesting. And the first is, we talk a lot about the splash moves that the Rams do. And you said it best about it being kind of a panic signing. Les Snead loves to use the terminology first mover advantage. He says that time and again. And what he really means by that is the Rams are always looking for opportunities and thinking about making transactions and constructing their roster in a way that other organizations are just not. And so their whole strategy is getting to their player, getting to their strategy first and quickest. And I think last summer and last offseason was the first time that first mover advantage was really in question, because with Von Miller leaving for Buffalo, with the price being a little bit too high in terms of that third year for the Rams to swallow, now it was for the first time they were kind of more of a reactionary position, because everything that you described, whether it was Ramsey or Cooks or Talib or Vaughn himself or OBJ, it was all of these moves that you never really saw coming. And the Rams were always the proactive one. They were always the aggressor. They were always the one pushing the envelope, making their strategy happen, and finding the guys to be able to do that. In the case of Wagner, it was the first time they were sort of on their heels and it was reactionary. And I remember you, me, and Skinny T last offseason were debating. We gave up Vaughn and Woods and ended up getting Wagner and Robinson. Net, where does that lead us? And I was pretty vocal about this being a worse roster in that 2-for-2 swap, essentially. And it was, I think it had to do in both cases where the Rams were in this more of a reactionary state. So this, I think, is an opportunity now for the Rams to reset the board and say, how do we get that first mover advantage again, realizing that, hey, we don't have the picks to be able to go make some transactions, but what can we do from a financial standpoint, a salary cap standpoint? How do we get clever in the draft? And how do we maybe package some trades to get that first mover advantage again?
Yeah, and it's a fun philosophy. And it should be fun as a fan. You know, it can be challenging because there's so many changes, there's so much risk involved. But the fact that this is an entertainment first business, whether people believe it or not, football and sport is entertainment. And when you run your organization, obviously the goal is to win, but the way you run and do transactions is even entertaining. That's what makes it exciting. And here's where I'm going with that, Jamal, is, you know, this first move, this first domino, you know, we're about 2.5 weeks away from the new league year. I think March 15th or somewhere around there is when free agency opens. The fact that Aaron Donald is coming back, Matthew Stafford's coming back, Cooper Kupp obviously is coming back, but he'll be healthy, and Sean McVay deciding to come back. We talked a lot during the season because the season was over in week 5. So we talked a lot about, all right, is this going to be a rebuild, a retool? We were kind of in agreement. It's like, okay, they're going to run it back one more time with this band, maybe try to get 1 or 2 more pieces, see what happens. Then, 2 years from now, it's going to be rebuild. Everyone's going to retire, yada, yada, yada. This move now, and I could be way off. This could be a hot take, and I've had an hour to think about this. So it's not like I've put a ton of research or thought, but this move has me thinking that this is just the first of many, many wild and roster busting moves. And it starts, when you look back at it, Jamal, it starts with the coaching changes. I mean, when McVay decided to come back, immediately 6 coaches gone. I mean, shook up the entire coaching room. And we've now filled our offensive coordinator, filled our offensive line coach, have a brand new, young, different-minded special teams coordinator. You obviously, Raheem Morris is back, but we're bringing back Aubrey Pleasant. You bring on Jimmy Lake in some role on defense, which I think is a phenomenal hire. We don't know exactly what his role will be yet, but whatever it is, he's a great defensive mind if you take the off the field stuff out. So we already shook up the coaching room. Now you release your captain of the defense, who you just signed to a 5-year deal, was only in year 1. So this now tells me, Jamal, and over the next week or two, maybe we can get into some projected players we see moving, but I think they shake the whole damn thing up. And I think they say, you know what? We don't want a 1-year window. And if we're going to use this mantra of all in, we want to keep going all in every single year, but we need to reshuffle, rebuild. Now, I don't know exactly how you do that because they're $15 million over the cap right now, and there's a lot of guaranteed money, and cuts are just going to add up in dead cap, which they're finally out of dead cap from Gurley and Goff, but now there'll be other dead cap from Wagner and others. But this has the feeling where there might be a big shakeup over the next 2 weeks. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Ryan, I completely agree. I think it's going to be a really significant shakeup for two reasons. I think that they're looking for a renewed sense of energy and spirit in that locker room and in that roster going into the 23 season. And I think secondly, they're trying to minimize downside as well, that in the event that 23 is sort of the last dance, if you will, that they can immediately transition into a rebuild. I think that they are going to try and be as aggressive as they possibly can, given that first mover advantage we're talking about. But at the end of the day, they are resource constrained. They are resource constrained with draft picks. They are resource constrained with the contract number that Stafford has, that Donald has, that Ramsey has, and now that Kupp has. So those are your four pillars. You're not going to be able to really do a lot of financial engineering outside of those four contracts and without the picks. So I think it's very much I think there's going to be splashes, but I think it's going to be kind of Moneyball splashes where, this Wagner trade, they're almost looking at it as, to your point, we're trading Bobby Wagner for Ernest Jones, for a younger, hungrier, cheaper version of Bobby Wagner. Can they go and make those types of moves around these four pillars and really arm these guys with the roster and with the depth creatively, given their constraints, to go make a serious run in 23 and then say, okay, after 23, even if it doesn't work out, we have a bunch of young, cheap players on their first contracts so we can transition into a rebuild very easily. Because the last thing you want to do is invest in a roster that's not going to get you there. And this group right now is right on that line. We don't know. I don't know how much is left in Matthew Stafford's tank. And anyone who says they do is just lying. I don't know how much is left in Aaron Donald's tank. I don't know how much is left in Jalen Ramsey's tank. I know what I have in Cooper Kupp, but the wide receiver is one of the most dependent positions in the sport. So these other three guys, I just don't know what I have. So you have to sort of play both, right? If you just go into a full-on rebuild right now, you lose that entertainment value. You lose the LA market for another year. So you have to be relevant. You have to be exciting, but you also have to be strategically and financially smart about it. Because the last thing you want to do is be what George Steinbrenner was late in his career, where they were just always getting rid of picks and picking all these aging guys. Or what Jerry Buss was late in his career, getting all of these aging superstars to try and make one more run. Because what that does is it just extends your rebuild life longer and it makes you less relevant in LA. So why I love the Wagner move is, again, it's Les Snead showing his deep intelligence where he's like, we're going for it. But at the same time, I don't want to be in a position where I have a bunch of washed up players that are really, really expensive in 24, 25, and 26. And I can only really start my rebuild in 26, which means I'm not going to be good until 28, 29, or 30. And by then, no one's going to care about the Rams, given the city of LA and all the other things to do. So I love this ability of sort of going all in, but also knowing that in is a relative term.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that I appreciate about the way the Rams do things, and this has been, if we compare to just in our city and compare to the Chargers, and I think since Staley's been there, this has changed, but since Telesco's been there now going into year 10, they have not done this. But the thing about the Rams is they will correct things very quickly, right? Like we saw them go and get Aqib Talib and Marcus Peters. And it's like, okay, that's a really fun, dynamic secondary. Move on from them, right? It lasted a year basically before they moved on. They go and get Jalen Ramsey. Do that. You look at big contracts for Todd Gurley and Jared Goff and Brandon Cooks. Decide very quickly. we're going to shift focus. Go get Matthew Stafford. We're going to cut Todd Gurley. We're going to trade Brandon Cooks away and go get other receivers and whatnot. So they've shown this ability to adapt. And up until this past season, it has worked overall. Like, obviously only one Super Bowl, but they've been to 2 in that 5-year span. They've had every year is a winning season. So they've had a lot of success with that model. And I want to get more into that after the break. We got to take a quick break, of course, on radio here. And so we will be right back after the break, because I want to discuss why last year didn't work and why this year we can see some moves that may seem bold and may seem desperate, but I think in reality can do really, really good things for this team moving forward. So be right back on radio. Keep it right here. This is the LA Football Show. All right, Los Angeles, welcome back to the LA Football Show. I'm your co-host, Ryan Dyer. This is Jamal Madney. Thank you all for tuning in. We are talking all things Rams right now on 1090, the mightier ESPN radio. If you're on podcast, we've just blown on through, and we'll keep on going here. And we're talking, this Bobby Wagner move, Jamal, and the fact that this Rams team has proven time and time again the adaptability, whether you like it or not. I know they get a lot of, it's funny. Before they won the Super Bowl, it's like everyone was, it's never going to work. This is crazy. They're reckless. They won a Super Bowl, and it's like, oh, wow, look at how brave they are, and the chess players and ingenuity. Well, then last year, obviously everything blows up and everyone's like, see, we told you it wasn't sustainable. And it's, that's how media does things. Right. But why last year didn't work, Jamal, and why this year I think they can change. And I'm saying this all on the fly here, so jump in if I ever start like I'm just rambling, and you can keep me on pace, because I think we'll be in agreement for the most part. And we brought it up earlier a little bit too. It seemed like last year's offseason, which may go down as maybe one of the worst offseason in the Les Snead era, for sure in the Sean McVay era. It was just a bad offseason. Obviously, the result is 5-12, but the fact of these contracts they have already releasing Bobby Wagner, yada, yada, yada. But every year, as I was alluding to before the break, the Rams kind of assess what went well, what didn't go well, and how to fix that problem. And whether that was offensive line changes, going to get Andrew Whitworth because they needed a stalwart on the offensive line, whether it was secondary issues, moving on from Talib Peters for Jalen Ramsey, whether that was quarterback changes, obviously. They've always said they weren't afraid to throw caution to the wind and say, either this didn't work or we made a mistake here. We'll correct it this way and we'll see if that works. And then we'll correct it again if it doesn't work. Last year, there wasn't a lot that needed correcting. They won the Super Bowl. And so when everything didn't go as planned, losing Von Miller, they ended up trading Robert Woods, obviously. OBJ got injured, so that was no longer an option. And so they made these almost reactionary moves, like I mentioned, in getting Bobby Wagner. The Allen Robinson signing. There's a great article Jordan Rodriguez, The Athletic, just put out. If you haven't checked it out, and I'm not blaming the players, but basically that move was very contingent on Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford saying, we'd love to have Allen Robinson here. And I'm not saying they were wrong, but that move was contingent on that. And then you have that coupled with Stafford's elbow injury. So literally built zero rapport with Robinson all offseason. And you get into week 1, and they literally haven't thrown passes together once. And so all that offseason I'm trying to get at is they had these reactionary moves, one after another, reaction based on this. Instead of being pro-action, they were reaction. Well, now we're back to the old way of thinking of pro-action and saying, you know what, Bobby Wagner, we love you. Didn't work out, though. Let's be proactive here. It was a mistake. Didn't work for our defense. Wasn't a schematic fit. Let's move on. Another move I'm going to throw at you, Jamal, I think they do. Maybe I'm crazy because the contract and there'd be a lot of dead money. And they're going to move on from Leonard Floyd. Leonard Floyd was a great piece here. He did some good things. I never like talking about guys' money because they earn it. It's theirs. But for his earnings, the sacks don't pile up for him. And you can't be paying that to a guy who's supposed to get you 15 plus sacks a year. Wouldn't be shocked if they move on from Leonard Floyd, and try to either go after a cheap option or really make that a focal point in the draft. So all that long-winded I'm trying to say is Last offseason was reactionary. I think this offseason we'll see the pro action yet again, and why we should hopefully see these moves that will at least make this Rams team a playoff contender in a fairly weak conference.
Yeah, Ryan. I mean, I think it's interesting. Yes, they're going to be more proactive. That's why it's so hard to repeat. I mean, it's when you're the hunted versus the hunter. Clayton Christensen talks about this all the time. The favorite former Harvard Business School professor who passed away in his theory of disruption. He always said that companies should be most afraid of being disrupted when they are being recognized for their greatness, when they are winning awards, when they're getting all the press, when it feels like they have arrived. That's when they should be most concerned. Pat Riley used to call it the disease of more when he was talking about the Lakers in the 80s and their quest to repeat and end up 25-ish year drought in the NBA of teams that had never repeated. So it's always very hard coming back that second year, especially, and let's be honest, with a roster that never felt dynastic. Okay, this was always a group that felt like if we could get one, it would have been success. And the fact of the matter is they got one in year one. And so now the question is, they're back now to being a little bit more of the hunters. And they're also back now in an NFC, Ryan, that I think gives them a little bit more opportunity to exhale. If we rewind back 12 months, yes, the Rams had just won a Super Bowl. Yes, they were dealing with the burden of always having to out-innovate the other team. But they also knew that people were on their heels. There was a sense that Tom Brady and the Bucs were just going to be potent again after an epic playoff game with the Rams, and they were just a piece or two, an injury or two away from really doing some great things. Aaron Rodgers was coming off back-to-back MVP seasons, and you felt like, you didn't know what was going to happen with Devontae Adams. Is he going to come back, and are they going to ride it again? You felt like, well, what's really going to happen with Dak Prescott? Is he going to make that next step and make that jump? You were looking at the Niners and Trey Lance, and you were thinking about him as potentially a breakout star. You were looking at, what are we going to get from Justin Fields year two? There was all of these elements out there with the NFC that had made it feel like it was a very stacked conference. So not only were the Rams winning, but they had to really be worried about who was in their rear view and objects being closer than they appear and really be on edge. And that, coupled with the pressure of being the defending champion, I think forced them into some difficult situations. Now they come back. They're able to reset in a world where they are the underdog again. They are the hunters again. But they are now in a world in the NFC where Matthew Stafford is the only starting quarterback in the NFC with the ring. So, you're going up against now groups and teams that don't have the experience, that don't have the big game performances, that can't say they've been there and done that. So you don't need these revolutionary moves to get back into contention. A couple of evolutionary moves will get you there. And so I think that frame of reference is also very different in this offseason versus that last offseason. They know if they can just make 4 or 5 really strong, high-value moves, it doesn't even need to be that sexy. It doesn't even need to be that LA. It doesn't need to be that Rams style. 4 or 5 really good high-value moves like Wagner for, getting discretionary money and being able to plug in players that they already had. Do you get rid of, Floyd? Do you sort of look around and see where are the other opportunities for value? You do that 4 or 5 times, you're going to be right back in the mix, assuming Stafford is healthy and assuming he's able to build that rapport. You draft a couple offensive linemen and really you're back in business. So I think that's what you're really banking on here and saying, can we kind of make another run with this group? I think it's a very different environment of pressure than they were 12 months ago. And now hopefully, Ryan, the other piece is it sounds like Sean McVay really had a lot of soul searching these last few weeks and understanding who he is more as a person. We forget how young he still is. And I think he's sort of realized that, and to Jordan Rodriguez's great article in The Athletic, he was so outcome focused where he said, well, all my happiness and all my validation and everything will come once I win a ring because I was destined to win a ring because I was the boy genius, I'm boy wonder. And the ring came and he didn't get the happiness. and I think he's realized that the happiness in life comes from the journey. It comes from taking each individual step, finding the beautiful small moments in life along the way. And hopefully that rewiring of perspective, coupled with a more barren NFC, coupled with being more of the hunter versus the hunted, all of that now becomes kind of a recipe for success in 2023.
And to piggyback off that, and this pertains to McVay and this Rams mantra or unit in general, and I'm sure you've heard it, but there's the great Matthew McConaughey, one of my favorite actors of all time. And when he won the Oscar, he had that phenomenal speech he gave of like the three pillars or the three people. And the last one he mentioned was the chase, right? Like, I'm always chasing myself 10 years from now because I'll never reach that. But if that's my hero, it's going to make me better because I'm always chasing it. And it felt like the Rams last year, after reaching the pinnacle, they kind of lost sight of what they were chasing. Like, they're like, oh yeah, we want another ring, but there wasn't a true path or design of what that chase would look like. Well, it's pretty easy to find that chase again when you go 5-12 and you have the offseason and the season you had last year. And it's like, now there's that hunger will probably be back. And McVay, I'm sure after the tumultuous season he had, is like, okay, I know what I'm chasing now. I know where I'm trying to get now, because whatever I was chasing last year, I thought I was incorrect. And so I think that's why we'll see a very different team. I think we'll see the organization, like I said, go back to kind of the way they did things, because they always had that chase mindset, if you will. And whether it's chasing this team from 2 years ago that won a Super Bowl or chasing the Chiefs who just won the Super Bowl, either way, that's better than where they were last year when they weren't chasing anything. They were just trying to replicate what they had done, because that's how you make mistakes. And there was that part in the article that talked about they were just trying not to lose. And anytime that happens and that occurs in sports, you're almost guaranteed to lose, and life in general. Like, if that's your mentality in anything you do, you're never going to do it well. You're never going to do it to the best of your ability. You may sometimes come out unscathed and win, but it's not going to be winning the right way, because you didn't chase the greatness. You succumbed to not trying to lose. You look like you're going to jump in there.
Yeah, Ryan. I mean, I think you said it best. Mike Krzyzewski, the great legendary Duke coach, always said that, especially when Duke was back-to-back college basketball champions in 91 and 92. And he came back that 92 year and he said, this idea, I hate the term defending champion, because you're already on the defensive that second year. You're already, I'm defending what I have. You're already kind of got your back against the wall and you're protecting what's behind you. And he said, we are going to attack this year. It doesn't matter what we did last year. You have to attack every year as being a new year. And I think the Rams succumbed to that pressure. And I think that the fact that they were and how could they not? Aaron Donald finally gets his ring. Boy Wonder finally gets his ring. Cooper Kupp, from very humble NFL beginnings, gets his ring. Matt Stafford never won a playoff game until last year and now gets his ring. It's hard for these guys not to feel like they reached the pinnacle, because let's be honest, this isn't the Chiefs. This isn't Patrick Mahomes. This isn't the next face of the league, where if he doesn't win 4 or 5 rings, it's considered a disappointment. This is a team that is much closer to the ilk of the 2012 Ravens or the 2011 Giants, or those teams that were really built to win 1 and maybe win 2. That is this team's ceiling, like it or not. If that offends people, tough. I mean, that's what this roster is constructed for. This is not a dynastic roster. And so I think when you get it that first year, you think you've got it made. And so I think now kind of getting back and reverting back, I think will be critical moving forward. And let's see, Ryan, I think this is going to be a really interesting year of how much is in the tank with all of these guys and how hungry are they?
So I said, I think we'll see, and this is literally guessing, so I don't want anyone saying I have sources or anything like that. I'm just guessing on a gut feeling, but hey, my gut feelings have been pretty good with these LA teams every now and then. I'll just say that, little pat on the back. I think Leonard Floyd might be on the move, whether it's through cut or through trade. Is there, and I'm putting you totally on the spot here, so you can just say, no, you haven't thought about it, but can you see a splash move on this roster of a guy who is a starter that we may not see here next year?
Ramsey. If
Yeah.
I were Les Snead, I would get rid of Ramsey. It's a law of diminishing returns. The prime has been passed, and corner is not that hard a position to replace at that level. At the all-pro level, at the all-world level, the Revis Island, the Dion level, prime Jalen Ramsey may have gotten to that place. I don't think so, but sure, for sake of argument, we'll say that. That's a game-changing piece on the chessboard. The moment you come one level lower or 1.5 levels lower from that, this is a commodity position. And so to me, if I'm Les Snead, I'm not telling anyone this. I'm certainly not telling Jalen Ramsey this, but under the radar, in my office, under the guise of some subtle phone calls, I am looking to see what can I get for Jalen Ramsey, because I don't believe that Jalen Ramsey can be a superstar on a championship team anymore. And so when you're talking about value, can I get a couple players for Ramsey? Can I even get a couple lower level picks for Ramsey and have my eye on some high value picks in the draft? I'm looking at Ramsey.
Okay, let me ask you this. And it makes it hard with the contract. He, next year, I believe his cap hit is $25 million. So obviously that's a factor when you look at trading. And I agree with you. I think he's definitely someone that they'll look at moving. I think Les Snead's going to have to be very quiet. This is a player, and I love Jalen Ramsey. I think he's a great person. He's a dynastic player that is obviously vocal and wears his heart on his sleeve. But if he hears he's being shopped, which he may have already because he's tweeting about it, that's not a guy you want to hear that, because it turns into a mess. But anyway, let's say they are. Most likely, just because the way the NFL works, these deals will be for draft picks, not for players. What kind of value do you think he can return? Because and I'm not talking bad about fans, but I think a lot of fans think that Rams can get like a first-round pick for him. I don't think that, especially with that contract. But he could potentially garner a low second or a third or a couple fours. Or what do you think kind of value they could get back for him?
I think, I'll be honest with you, I think it depends on how desperate the team is on the other side and what the piece is. I'm in that, can I get a 4 and a 5? Can I get a couple 4s? Like, I think that's where you're playing. But I don't think that's bad. I actually think there could be real value, especially when you look at this particular draft and you look at some depth at some positions like tight end, like pass rush. There's a couple of areas here where, if you sort of offensive line, obviously, you can get a very credible starter quality offensive lineman in the 4th round, 5th round. And I would sort of approach it that way. You're not going to get a first rounder for him. You're not going to get a second and a third for him. It's just not going to happen. But even if I can get a couple 4s or a 4 and a 5, I'm thinking about it, Ryan. I really am, because the evidence was clear. He was done at the end of last year. I said it last year. If Aaron Donald is not Superman and Burrow has half a second more and he lobs it up to Jamar Chase, who was wide open, and the Bengals win that game, Jalen Ramsey would have had a LeBron-like 20 summer, the way LeBron was in 2011 after losing to the Mavericks with the Heat. Jalen Ramsey would have had to be in a hoodie and sunglasses all summer in LA and tried to be avoided, or go up to Wyoming or Montana, or what. We think of him differently because Aaron Donald is who Aaron Donald is, and the Rams got the ring. He got burned by Chase. He got burned by Mike Evans in the playoffs. He got burned all year. Jalen Ramsey is done, okay? He can be a serviceable player, but I don't want a serviceable player at $25 million. And to your point, if you're looking for high value and you're looking to be proactive, it's that value investing principle. The great investors don't always get the upside. It's to your earlier point, Ryan. The great investors know when to cut their losses immediately and be able to set themselves up for success. Trading Ramsey in the offseason is cutting your losses immediately, because he's going off a cliff. the days of elite Jalen Ramsey are OBER.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it all the time. Corners of all positions have the quickest drop off, it seems like. Running backs maybe too. But corners can be elite one year and fall off a cliff very quickly. And we definitely saw that last year, and obviously didn't get a lot of help on the back end. But if you're as great as he thinks he is, which he was, but he didn't have that year last year. So I think, and we're running out of time here, so I'll say this quickly, but this is a very different position. But you look at Von Miller was able to get a second and a third at 32 years old, but he was on an expiring contract. So it depends how teams want to look at it, right? Because Jalen will have 3 more years on his deal. So a team could look at that as like, great. Yeah, he's making good money, but we don't have to renegotiate. We don't have to worry about trading assets and he's gone. Like, we have him for 3 years. So I think they could potentially get a 2 and a 3. I know there's a very different position, so it's hard to compare, but I think that would be the max. And that's a 2 and a 3 from a team that's like, hey, we're a corner away. Like, we need one other corner in our defense to remain elite and have a run at a Super Bowl. I think probably that 3 to 4 is more likely, but I agree with you that for the Rams' sake, as much as I love Ramsey, as much as he's been great for this team, for them to get back to the way they've been thinking, it just makes too much sense for them to get younger that position. They have some young guys they want to develop. They brought back Aubrey Pleasant strictly for that reason, because he's great at developing young cornerback talent. So we'll see how that goes. Of course, we're out of time. This is the Rams edition for radio. We'll be back with plenty more LA football talk. But Ramley, appreciate you. Let us know your thoughts on the Wagner move, on any of these busting moves that we just dropped on you. We'd love to hear from you. For Jamal, Matt, and Brian Darrell, radio, talk to you after the break. Peace.
You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.